This is just a quick startup video. When you first power the machine up, on the main screen, you don't see anything there. But if you go here, you'll see that flashing servo home. Before the machine will run, if you notice here, you can turn the power on. Blade won't start. You always have to home this when you power up the machine for the first time. So we're gonna home it there. You'll see the ram starts to run forward. And what that is doing is there's a proc switch on the very front here, and that's gonna find its zero. Once it finds zero, it's gonna go back to a setting we have in here under feed setup. And actually, since we powered the machine off, we need to log back in. There's two passwords. One is M, like maintenance, and one is S, like supervisor. I'm gonna log in as maintenance, hit enter, and there actually is no password. You just type in the username. We're now logged in. Now if I go to that feed setup here, you'll see reset position 29.62. So what that did was it went back 29.62 inches from that switch. That can be adjusted, but just keep in mind that if you go any further back, you're gonna hit this pin. And there's also an over travel proc switch back here. So you actually only gain about another ½ inch. Just like the Anko slicer, we have a quick disconnect here. There's also a locking nut. If you're running frozen product, we use that locking nut to keep the gripper from shaking. In your application doing bacon and pepperoni, you can probably loosen that up and just use the quick release on there. Quick run through, we have a wash down mode on here. Since you didn't buy a conveyor, I can't really show you how it works, but there is a frequency drive for a conveyor. If you decide to hook up your own conveyor, then when they're done running production, you can switch it over to wash down mode, and then the conveyor will run just for easy cleanup. But to go back to how the machine functions in the HMI here, your operators can just scroll through and hit different programs. These are just from previous machines we've done for customers. When I've gone out on install, I've set them up. Let me just say we want to load a test. Right now, all these programs are identical. Space count is how many times the blade spins and the ram doesn't move forward. It's like a gap. Slice count is 9. It's going to slice 9 slices and then spin RPM for a space on your conveyor. Thickness. Right now I have 125 thousandths for a thickness. You can easily go in there and change it to whatever you want. Blade RPM. 950 RPM is a pretty, the machine likes 950 RPM. It's balanced. If you want to run faster or slower, you can go up to 1250 RPM. It notes 1500 RPM. You can type 1500 RPM in there if you choose, but the machine actually maxes out at 1250 just for safety. If we go into the feed setup, reset position, we already went over that. That's how far back the ram goes from that switch on the back. Reset speed, it's 40 hertz. It's gonna go back at that speed. If you wanna run it faster, you can. Usually at startup for the break-in period, I like to run it at 40. And then after a couple of weeks, if you wanna just increase that reverse speed, you can bump it up to 60. Fast advanced speed, that's if you don't wanna wait for your product to get to the blade as it's feeding forward. You can hit fast forward and it'll run that ram a little faster so the production workers aren't waiting for the meat to get to the blade. Slow return, slow advance. These are more for maintenance. They can slowly advance the ball screw or return it if they're working on it. Blade position. You can go in here and it's 0 to 4095. In the startup guide I send you, it'll explain how this works. But if you're getting a sliver slice when you're counting, say you're doing, it doesn't matter, 4 slices, 6 slices, and your first slice is a little thinner or thicker, you adjust this number to take that out and get the thickness correct. And then same thing on the blade position last slice. If it's too thin or too thick, you adjust these numbers to make up for it. Again, that's in the quick user guide on how to actually do that. This is the exit conveyor, which there isn't one right now, but if you choose to hook yours up, you can go in here and change it 0 to 120 hertz. And then recipes, you can go in here, change your recipe name to whatever you choose. And then once you create your recipe name and all your formulas or all your settings in there, just go in there and hit save recipe. And once you save it, it'll be saved as test. I always tell the operators just to use this window here when they're selecting their programs, just so they don't accidentally make a change. As long as they're logged in as a supervisor, that shouldn't be a problem. But in most plants, it seems like they end up using that maintenance password. You usually don't turn the machine off unless you're working on it. I like the heat of the electrical components to keep the panel warm, keep moisture out of it. There's 20 recipes in here total that you can have. Like I said, right now every recipe should be identical. You'll have to go in there and set them up. There's 2 knobs on here to open the door. There's a safety switch here. If that's open, the machine won't run. There's another safety switch here on this front gate. And it's possible, depending on what kind of conveyor you're using, you may need to modify the guard, raise it up, down, or cut it back. As far as maintenance goes, every morning before you start to run, lubricate the ball screw. Just run a bead all the way down of mineral oil. If you're running more than an 8-hour day, maybe on lunch break, you might want to run a second bead of mineral oil down. Just like the Yanko, there's a grease fitting here on the main shaft. You want to grease that probably once a day before startup. And then the main bearings for your drive shaft, you have a grease zerk here, a grease zerk here. You want to grease those once a week. Your fingers here, just like the Yanko, probably once a week. There's stainless steel clock springs in there. In the back here, we run a drive belt with an encoder. There's an encoder on here that's, the computer knows exactly where that blade position is at all times. If you end up getting thin and thick slices after startup, you can always check this encoder back here to make sure it didn't disconnect from the blade. There's a couple set screws in there. There's also a tensioner arm back here with 1 grease zerk on there. I'd grease that once a week. Other than that, that's a pretty good quick start guide. If you have any other questions, give me a call. When you do install it, I'm going to ship some rubber pads. We like to bolt the machine to the floor, setting it on rubber pads. If you don't want to bolt it, still use the rubber pads and try to level the machine the best you can. And just check for loose bolts from shipping and make sure all these sensors are good and tight when they arrive. Sometimes they like to come loose in shipping. But other than that, any other questions, please give me a call.